Okay.
Thank you.
So I would like to highlight that regulation is a multidisciplinary subject, and it deals with three main disciplines, which are engineering. And when I say engineering, I am mentioning several topics that might be covered by engineering. I'm not, please do not think that uh, it would be only related to electrical engineering. Of course, transmission and power system has a lot to do with electrical engineering, but it's not, certainly, it is not only related to that specific engineering. Uh, Especially in the power.
You don't have to worry.
Is everything okay?
That is
Okay,
clearly.
there is a microphone opened. Would you mind just turning it off, please? Okay. So as I was trying to say that, especially the generation area, it deals with several disciplines, like because you have to deal with several technologies, different technologies. You have the nuclear. Just to pointing out the thermal generation technology, it has several other subjects, minor subjects related to the thermal technology. Some of them are the nuclear engineering, the classic thermal engineering, which has other minor subjects as well. But it's the thermodynamic subject in most of the cases. You may have also the biothermal, which has different properties more related to agricultural engineering and chemical engineering as well. Of course, very related to the fuel. So we have also the petroleum, the oil, which is another kind of very important fuel that has its technical issues very related. That we also have some specific engineering that deals with that. We may have hydropower, which is the subject from which I come, which is more related to hydraulic engineering, to hydrology, to the hydrology or meteorological sciences, and so forth. And regulation also has to do with economics. I think it's the main discipline because in the end, you are. Shalom is showing up the slides. I ask for you guys. I beg a pardon because I didn't translate it to English because I wouldn't. I don't want to be specific related to these slides. My idea was just to get some inspiration in these slides in order to have a conversation with you guys here. So as I was saying that it's a multidisciplinary subject, regulation. It has to do with engineering, several subjects, minor subjects, and economics. In the end, we are very concerned about regulating to giving the right economic signals in order to the markets to behave properly, which is a very, very difficult task. And when I say market, you have also different kind of markets. You have classical natural monopolies, which in the end is not, you are not able to have a proper market functioning. So the regulation has a more weight of oversighting and controlling the agent's behavior, and in the end, trying to overcome the natural asymmetry, information asymmetry that the regulator has with the other stakeholders. But in the end, you have to establish equations and a regulatory framework in order to control the agent's behavior, because in this specific kind of areas, you don't have a market properly. You have a natural monopoly. I'm mentioning, by saying that, I'm mentioning the grid infrastructure or facilities services, which are not in the power sector. I'm mentioning the transmission lines, which are classically divided into high voltage and low voltage. But in the end, you have a line, a grid, which is not, you don't have an economic feasibility to build more than one line in parallel and with more than one provider, supplier of that service, because you don't have economic feasibility on doing that. Several lines in parallel. It doesn't have rationality to do that. So in the end, you have just one line, and if you have one line, you are facing a classical monopoly problem. That because of that, the regulation has to endorse a greater power in the economic activity itself, and regulated the price and the quantities in the end, and how the stakeholder that will carry out the operation of the line shall behave, economically speaking. I don't know if you guys got that, but it's in the end, it's something similar to that. And you have in other infrastructure services like water supply, roads, sewage, captioning as well. These are all grid services, which are in the end monopoly services. And in this case, the regulator has to endorse a greater power, a great regulation power in order to organize the activity itself. But in the power sector, you have this important issue, which is the grid services. But you have in some other activities, you may have classical competition. And by saying that, I'm mentioning especially the generation services, where somehow you have you got more space for competition. You have several technologies that can provide the services. As I mentioned, hydropower, thermal facilities, which may be divided in all the several minor other technologies. Now you have wind farms, solar panels, and they may compete for the supply of the electricity. And this is a kind of area where you have a more classical competition, and so the regulation role is maybe much more different from the classical grid and natural monopoly services. And for that, you should be ready to enroll, let's put it this way, several economic techniques in order to give the right signal in order to pursue the right outcome, the efficiency outcome, in where the competition is available. This is just to say very quickly that even in the power sector, you have different activities, and because of that, you must behave differently as a regulator. when you have a natural monopoly or whether you may have competition. And by saying that, you may have also different grades of competition. In the end, it's very difficult to find the perfect competition that if you guys deal with regulation, when you open an economic book, it's in the first page of this classical economic books, you may find the perfect competition, which is a very important theoretical construction in order to learn about the classical approaches and the classical axioms of the economics. But in the end, in the reality, you may not have, you have side effects, you don't have a completely perfect competition, and it's very important to be aware of what are the market failures and act properly so that failures you may find in the reality. Okay, I'm very theoretical here, but it's the broad and first approach of regulation is to deal with the technologies themselves, the economic approach, and the third and very important and last pillar of every regulation rule is the law. So it's the legal framework, the regulatory framework, the rules themselves that shall be designed and applied and in the end of the day. And they must reflect all the technicalities that we mentioned before that come from the engineering and from the economic disciplines. In the end, you have to mix these three disciplines and evolve these, which we call the regulatory framework, along throughout the time. And it's a very difficult task in the end to address such different disciplines and come with them together, organizing also an industry where you have different objectives, perspectives. You may be aware, shall be aware about the consumer's objective, which is being provided by the services at the least cost possible. On the other side, you have the entrepreneurs that they seek for, how can I say that? For the economic, higher economic outputs. And the regulators is between these two sides in order to find the best equilibrium, the optimal point where you have the service provided with fair costs, and in the other sides, stakeholders seeking for investments, seeking for providing the services, competing among themselves in order to provide it with the best quality, and of course, in the end, also gaining their just economic profit, which is also an very important objective. Okay, guys. So this is the, let me put this way, the guidelines where we are when in a regulator role, and to be more specific, now I could just highlight some of the Brazil's and not only Brazil's, but maybe common issues that we are facing worldwide. For instance, the decarbonizations. We have to deal with all these complexities I mentioned before, but not forgetting the environmental agenda nowadays, which is seeking for minimizing the impacts of the fossil fuels, decarbonizing our mix, and also, of course, providing the services, being seeking justice on the services supply, so reaching all the population of the countries with a fair cost. So you can imagine that this is not an easy task. Brazil, for instance, as shown on the show, has a big power systems. Despite it's in Portuguese, I think the numbers and the figures help us in order to understand what is the main message here. We have like 80 millions of customers, which is quite an amount of customers. In the utilities sector, we have more than 100 utilities providing the services, precisely 105 utilities, which you guys can imagine that it's difficult to deal with such an amount of providers of the services, of this kind of services. So this is just to have an idea of how difficult it is to deal with such an amount of different providers. We have a generation capacity nowadays that in the slide is mentioned 190 gigawatts, but precisely today on the current date, we are in April 2024, we have overlapped the 200 gigawatts of generation capacity, which is a very respectable power system from the point from the perspective of power itself, more than 200 gigawatts. We have almost 200,000 kilometers of transmission grids, which is quite an amount of distance, if you may realize. We have a peak load, which has also overcome the 100 gigawatts threshold. It has reached on March 2024 the 102 gigawatts. And nowadays, the distribution energy resource, the DER, very common found in the literature, has reached almost 20 gigawatts, which is a very impressive number, and it also puts very great challenges in order to regulate, because its classification resembles, it's distributed. It's very spatially. We are like, let me formulate it differently. We're not dealing with a wholesale power sector anymore, or prevalence of wholesale generation and centralized control of the generation and the power system, but now we are facing the opposite of wholesale is a retail perspective for the generation and also for the grid, which make things much more difficult in order to control not only the economic aspects, but also the physical and the operation, the grid's operation itself, because the tension and the power are produced in very dynamically, and they change very dynamically in a retail perspective, which make things very more complicated. From the operation itself, you don't have the control of the demand and the supply throughout the time. You may be aware to control and to forecast the sun and the wind in a more spread perspective. In each, you cannot reach the every customer's house and see whether their proper generation system are working properly. And so this become the things, the variables, supply variables, and also the demands variables becomes much more randomly, become much more random. And it's a challenge for controlling the tension and the power, the frequency, the voltage of the systems throughout the time. So, but this is it has no backwards. This is the future. Actually, this is the present, and we have to deal with that. We have to operate this system, and we have to try to allocate its costs properly, seeking justice, seeking reaching all customers' house. My goodness, it's becoming so difficult. No, the presentation is not available in English. I'm sorry for that. I couldn't translate it timely. I'm trying to just to translate it lively here. I'm sorry for that. Oh, Shalom, could you go for the next slide, please? Thank you. So this is a broad perspective of the Brazilian power systems. In 2000, almost 20 years before, we had 80 gigawatts, very led by hydropower with 85% of a mix. And nowadays, hydropower is just half of the supply mix. It's much more, it has been spread by other technologies like wind with 12%, solar, which is the principal technology nowadays. It has the greatest increase from the latest years. And we have also DER, which is GD, also increasing very rapidly, and biomass, other sources of thermal powers, and nowadays reaching more than 200 gigawatts of capacity, installed capacity. So it's becoming much more complex to, in the end, properly allocate the cost of this more complicated mix as well. It's also interesting. Do not be upset. It's interesting to deal with that. We have to be prepared and study a lot. It never ends, but in the end, it's very exciting to work in this with this very dynamic reality we are facing nowadays. We could go to the next slide, please, Shalom. This is just a brief perspective of the distributed energy resources. As I said, they are increasing very fast. We can see from the bars. In late 2016, we had only 85 megawatts, and nowadays we have more than 20 gigawatts of it. So you can realize how fast it is increasing, and it has, as I said, it won't go backwards. It just increase, and we have to operate the systems and address its costs by the time things are running without our control, without a centralized control. It's a very big challenge to deal with this. Would you please go for the next slide? Oh, this slide is in English. Wind installed capacity. We can see the curve. By the beginning of the 2010s decade, we can see the wind installed capacity increasing very, very much in Brazil. And we see this movement more recently with the PV installed capacity from 2018, and in this decade in particular, it's increasing very, very fast. Okay, next slide, please. Sorry for asking that. This is just to highlight that Brazil, in the power perspective, the power mix, electricity mix, Brazil is a leader with more than 80, almost 85% of its mix being provided by renewable sources. And they are hydropower, solar, and photovoltaic panels. And also we have important an important share of thermal producers that come from biomass, which is also can be classified as a renewable source. So when you put all these technologies together, we reach 85% of the supply being provided by. And here I mentioned the installed capacity. Depending on the how the weather is, how the climate is, how the hydrologic regime perform in a specific year, we may reach more than 90% of the supply being fully provided by renewables, which is a milestone, I would say. We are very proud of that. Okay, Shalon, but how can we address this such a clean supply? We have to build lines and connect almost the entire country with lines in order to make this supply feasible. So in 2001, we have this figure, despite not being in English, I think you guys may understand that in the beginning of the 2000 years, we had this, we used to have this amount of lines already built, put in place, which accounted for 70,000 kilometers. And nowadays we are reaching 200,000 kilometers with a very much more spread grid topology that reaches the most important loads throughout, not throughout, but within the main capitals and the main cities of the country. Actually, we have just one state of ours, which is a northern state, where you can see in the picture. We unfortunately we cannot read the legend, but we are actually building the line in order to connect this last state, the state of Roraima, which is still the only one which is not interconnected to the Brazilian grid. And we have in order to control this huge grid, we have a ISO, independent system operator, that controls the supply and the demand throughout the time, 7 days a week, 24 hours, 36, 365 days each year. It doesn't it doesn't have a rest. It runs the system and controls the systems almost entirely every time. It has no rest. It's a completely real-time operation. And not only the real-time operation, we have a very complex and sophisticated scheduling approach in order to trying to minimize the costs and also ensure the quality of the supply and the availability of the plants, and also I always forget this word, reliability, the system's reliability. The ISO is every time aware about seeking the system reliability. So this is it. We may move forward, please. For the next slide, this is like some things about the grid. I would, we can move forward, please. It's more or less the same thing about the mix and the share of each technology. And now it's just to highlight that, sorry for the Portuguese, but as a regulator, we try to be neutral regarding the technologies. In the end, we try not to make privilege from one technology other than other. We just to try to, we are concerned about the quality of the service, the reliability of it, and in the end, the costs, allocating properly the costs. So it's important guideline from the regulatory perspective, not being how can I say that? Forgot the word. Not to make privileges regarding the technologies. We have a mantra which is being neutral regarding the technologies, and we try to not put barriers or hurdles to the investments. We try to make them feasible and to be put in place as much as the private interests and try to gather the private interests in order to make the proper investments. I'm afraid I have already said a lot of things. I don't know about the time, Shalom. How much time do I have left, or did I overcome my my time slot here? Does anybody could help me with this? Telling me how much time left.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know I was on mute. Yeah, the time we're supposed to end like 5 minutes ago, and
Okay.
I would please
Okay.
know that there might be questions. Maybe if you can stay I am around for the end of the section, so to
Okay.
just ask a question.
Okay, I'll stay here. I'm sorry, didn't. Well, I tried to make a great panorama of what is the regulation role, what are our main challenges, the systems nowadays, the renewables, and all this kind of stuff, which is very common worldwide, and I think might be somehow useful for you. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. And also, I must say thank you for the invitation and for your patience in order to listen to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Engineer Bruno. I know that it's just about all the connectivity issues, but I'm happy that we sorted it out. Thank you so much for the section. And please, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat box for Engineer Bruno, and he's going to attend to them all. So it's my pleasure to welcome our second speaker for the second section today, which is Miss Chinenye Ajayi. And I'll just tell you a little bit about her, and then you will get to hear from her as well. Chinenye is an energy professional. She's a versatile commercial lawyer with over a decade experience and is currently a managing associate and team lead of the power and infrastructure practice at Olaniwon Ajayi LP, where she provides legal and business advisory services to clients within the energy sector, particularly in the renewable energy space. She is an entrepreneur who is passionate about energy transition and achievement of the SDG 7. This includes education, training, mentorship, and economic empowerment towards promoting affordable energy access and energy security. Amongst other volunteer activities within the energy sector, she serves as a co-coordinator of the African Fellowship of Young Energy Leaders an education venture designed to invest into the next generation energy leaders who would deliver a sustainable access to energy and ultimately a zero carbon Africa. She serves also as the vice president in terms of projects at the Energy Institute Young Professionals Network. Please, with our round of emojis, make welcome Martina for her section. Thank you so much for joining. Hello, Martina. Can
you see me and can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Sorry, I'm trying to get my glasses on. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. Shalom. It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you so much, Engineer Bruno, for that great session. And it was nice seeing you again. Thank you so much. And okay, I know a lot has been said, and what I would just do right now is you just go directly into it, and we know the objective of this session today is to deal with, electricity policies, regulation, and how they work. Right. So I'll just start off by saying that, again, I'm a lawyer, so I have a legal background. I guess that will kind of help me dimension things very much clearly for you. So when it comes to, development of any economic space whatsoever, one of the most important, one of the most important things to be done is setting the right legal and regulatory framework to support any kind of development. I was just reading, because one of the things we're talking about is the US Inflation Act. And I was just seeing how just a single legislation can bring about a tremendous turnaround in an economy of a nation or in any particular sector. And this just points to the fact of how important, how necessary, right, how fundamental, if I may, the role of policies and regulations, they play within the energy sector. So just to give a little bit of the definition per se, apologies, I don't have the slide. I really didn't know that we would, have such a maybe a bit of a longer time. I would have come up with a slide, but then I'll try to speak to some of the issues. Hopefully you get to take a few lessons or take notes from there. So yeah, so when it comes to policies are generally documents produced by governments, government agencies that kind of just indicate intention, right? Intention of that government in any particular sector or aspect of the economy. So policies are not necessarily laws, and the reason is that the difference is that policies are not binding. So you can't say, for instance, the Nigerian government stated that they would give tax credits to all Nigerians, or like they say they're going to do one thing or the other. It's just a statement of policy, and you can't hold them. You can't hold them bound, to keep to those things that they have said. So that's the policy. But of course, policy it's an indication, or more like a statement of intention of what the government is set to do. So in Nigeria, if I may, use Nigeria as a case study, we have a couple of policies in the Nigerian electricity sector, right? So chief of them is the national just a second, is the PSRP. Okay, no, not PSRP. I think PSRP, apologies, is just one of them. But we have the national energy policy, and the national energy policy is policy that speaks to, the overall intention of this government when it comes to the energy policy for the country. It also then discusses, the plans, the projections of the government, essentially, when it comes to policies generally, when it comes to what they intend to do, when it comes to how sustainable development to be, achieved through energy, the kind of energy resources that, the government is looking to invest in, and plans towards attracting the right kind of investment. Then we also have the National Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Policy, typically called ENRE. Now, that policy is specifically focused on renewable energy and promoting energy efficiency. So, and it's one of the foremost policy when it comes to renewable energy within the country. Then we also have what's called PSRP. And PSRP means the Power Sector Regulatory Program. Is a policy, undertaken by the government that is geared towards restoring financial viability of the power sector. It's meant to improve transparency and, promote service delivery within the sector. Now, we know very well that the Nigerian power sector is grappling with liquidity issues. Discos are not able to, meet up with their obligations for lack of funding. GenCos meaning generation companies are also, are being owed millions of naira, for electricity generated as yet to be paid for by the government, and we can go on and on. So, but the idea around the PSRP is to improve financial viability, resolve customer complaints, reduce losses, and improve the energy infrastructure. So it's under PSRP. I believe you have the things around the government interventions, different interventions by the government to promote or improve the electricity sector. Then we also have what we call, I don't know, I've heard about the Presidential Power Initiative, PPI. That's an initiative again, or a policy, but of course backed by an action. That's where we have the Siemens transaction, the Siemens project. I'm sure maybe some of us must have had that relates to improving the transmission and the distribution infrastructure in Nigeria. So those are policies, right? So when you now talking about laws, so laws are binding provisions that go through the National Assembly. Of course, for those of us that have a government background, we are taught in school how laws move from first reading, second reading in National Assembly. So all through that process, a law goes through all of that. And because laws go through all of that, they are regarded as binding, and usually a breach of them, if you breach the provisions of the law, there are penalties and there are consequences. So it's when you have a law that you can then enforce it against the government or enforce it against any other player within the energy sector. So for Nigeria, as a case study, we have the main legislation or statute that regulates the power sector is the Electricity Act. Now, I'm sure we've all heard of that if you're within the energy sector. The Electricity Act is one of the novel act, passed by a National Assembly that covers a wide range of things within the sector. And notably is the fact that for the first time, we have renewable energy covered in a statute. So proud to the Electricity Act, where essentially just had renewable energy at policy level. So we had a lot of things the government has said they were going to do with respect to policies, but for the first time we have that incorporated into an act of the National Assembly. And then it's in addition to that, there's also the requirement of the regulatory agency in this regard to come up with incentives and other initiatives to promote renewable energy. Then there is feed-in tariffs. We have when there's feed-in tariffs arrangement as well provided in the law. So I don't know. I know we are quite pressed for time, but I would just give a few highlights of what the Electricity Act speaks to. So first, mainly the Electricity Act is meant to open up the electricity market, right? And for the first time, we have a law that contemplates participation of different levels of government in the electricity sector, from the federal level and the state governments, right? So both federal and state governments can now make laws in relation to electricity. They can develop their electricity market at both the federal level and the state level. And it just means that every state now has, I like to say it's more like an open check, right? That it can then come up with creative and innovative means of promoting energy access within their respective states. And the idea also is to promote competition, to ensure that the market is viable and set up in such a manner that would attract investors. So another notable provision within the Electricity Act is that, typically what we had under the previous law was, generation. We had three mainstream: generation, distribution, generation, transmission, distribution. They also had trading, but for the first time, we're introducing what is called supply. So supply is more like a person that buys electricity from a generating company and supplies to a consumer. Now, in this instance, the supply does not necessarily have to have a distribution network. Okay, so what that means is that I, Chineke, today can say, I want to apply for this. I can establish a company and get into the supply business and then apply for a license from NERC. And what that empowers me is to do is like I go to a Genco and then I say, I want to buy 50 megawatts of electricity, and I approach a consumer and say, I need to get, can I sell you 50 megawatts? And once there's an agreement, I have to enter into an agreement with the owners of distribution networks, right? Because of course I can't convey the electricity in the buckets. That's in the lighter notes. But I have to use, there has to be it has to pass through lines and networks. So you then need to enter into a contract with the use of with the transmission lines or the distribution line, depending, and then for the wheeling of that power from the Genco location to the consumer location. Now, of course, this is what the Electricity Act contemplates, and we expect that the regulator in due course will come up with regulations to guide this, and also we need to get to a certain level when it comes to development of the sector or the market to be able to get this up and running. But this just to give you some idea as to what the Electricity Act speaks to, right? And then we have a number of other innovations around that. So we have, for instance, we have a more robust provision on tariff. And then this is a very interesting one because the tariff here, according to the tariff methodology, is meant to enable investors not just recover the cost of their investment, but also a reasonable return on their investment. And it also provides for a carve-out. So carve-out being that, typically the regulator determines how much the tariff is calculated, how the tariff is calculated. But in this instance, there's a carve-out for a willing buyer and a willing seller arrangement, meaning that notwithstanding the tariff that has been approved by the regulator called NERC being Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, notwithstanding the approved tariff, you can actually have a private arrangement with a consumer to sell at a different price, usually a higher price, outside the tariff regime. Okay, but of course, it's still subject to the approval of NERC in a way, just to ensure that there is no abuse of power whatsoever. So we have that, and we have feed-in tariffs. We have, we can go a lot of innovative. I can't go into all of that, but a lot of innovative provisions within the Electricity Act. So I have spoken now to laws, and I've spoken now to policies and laws. Now I want to also explain what regulations mean. So regulations are offshoot of laws, right? And regulations are are usually issued by agencies empowered by law to regulate a particular sector or to coordinate the activities within a particular sector. And the idea around regulations is that, many times at the point a law is drafted, not everything that could possibly happen can be envisaged at that time. Okay, and then you can't possibly have every single minute detail captured in the law. So the purpose of a regulation is to deal with those finer details as to how the law will be implemented. Okay, to provide guidance, to provide a lot more detail and more like step-by-step process of implementing different aspects of the law. So for instance, you will see that the Energy Act, the Electricity Act, provides for willing buyer, willing seller arrangement, right? But then that is just a broad provision. There is, the necessary detail you will expect to see as to how that will work, you wouldn't find it in the law. But then we then have a regulation called eligible customer regulation that now regulates a scenario where certain categories of consumers can purchase directly from GenCos without necessarily going through the distribution lines. So we have such regulation, and an example of them, I think one of them just came out about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and that's the eligible customer regulation. And so that regulation then provides in a lot more detail how that regime is meant to work. So if you're operating within an electricity sector, it's important that you travel that line. So from the policy level, you move down to laws, and then you move down to regulations. So when it comes to regulations, there are a lot more regulations than laws. Currently, the main law regulating the sector is Electricity Act 2023. But then we have a lot more. We have, like, if I'm not mistaken, about 100 regulations dealing with different things. Okay. I may not be able to speak to all of them, but I'll just speak to a few that I believe might be very helpful to participants today. That also are somewhat controversial. So for instance, there is the Consumer Protection Regulation. Now, this regulation speaks to, please confirm that you can hear me. I just want to be sure I'm not speaking to myself.
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you. So yeah, I was speaking about the Consumer Protection Regulation. And now this is, in fact, a lot of people have contacted me, particularly, I don't know if you're in Nigeria, I'm sure you are conversant with the new tariff increment for consumers within Band A. You know, I've had a lot of people complain, and they tell you, oh, it's too high and all of that. A lot of people feel like they've been cheated for one reason or the other. So Consumer Protection Regulation essentially consolidates and provides for framework for consumers to complain or make complaints or have their issues resolved whenever they have any issue with any player or stakeholder within the energy sector, particularly the distribution companies. Reason being that, you know, they are like they have direct contact with the consumers. It ensures that the services provided by the discos align with international best practice and ensure that they meet minimum standards of service delivery. So a very key component of that regulation is that it provides for what we call the consumer complaints units, typically called CCU. And every disco meaning distribution company, right? Every disco is meant to have a CCU. And when you have a complaint, you approach the CCU within your disco. You know, previously, if you want to make a complaint, it has to be in writing. But thankfully, I think the new regulation that was passed sometime last year now allows customers to make complaints through telephone calls, through text messages, through calling their customer care lines. And discos are now mandated to maintain customer care lines. So if you're on the call and you have a problem, kindly reach out to your customer care line of your disco. Okay, so in addition to that, so when you have filed your complaint and it's not resolved within a particular period of time, I think it's 12 to 15 days or so, you can then report to what we have the NEC forum. NEC forum is like an appellate level at the regulatory with the regulator that allows you to file your complaint when it's not resolved by your disco, right? And then at that level, if you're still not satisfied with what the decision of the NEC forum, you can then appeal to the court. So, and then you also have other provisions in that regulation that speaks to the fact that you shouldn't disconnect a customer without providing notice to the customer, at least 48 hours notice, right? And then it also mandates this goes to meter everyone. Okay, that's a discussion for another day because we know that's not really implemented. But yeah, they're meant to meter everyone. And then for those customers that are yet to be metered, so mainly just using estimated billing, there's a particular framework or method for calculating that, and the discos are meant to comply. And I think the last point I want to make on this regulation, a couple of other things we can check them out subsequently, but is the fact that, you know, discos are not meant to hold tenants responsible for paying past electricity bills of former tenants who occupied the house. I find this very interesting because I find a lot of clients reaching out like, I occupy this house and my landlord is asking me to pay for electricity owed by my previous tenant. So that's not allowed, legally speaking, right? So that's just one of the regulations. Then we have the mini-grid regulations that govern mini-grids in Nigeria. And interestingly, that regulation was recently reviewed. And just to point out a few things, previously, before you can get a mini-grid established in an area where you have a distribution company, then you need to get the consent of the distribution company. And this has been a problem because many times the discos within the area wouldn't want to give a consent, or they kind of delay the process. A lot of issues have come up in that regard. But the new mini-grid regulations currently provide that the discos are meant to come back with a feedback within a certain number of days. And when they fail to come back with a feedback, it is deemed approved, right? So this is meant to expedite the process. And then it also provides for compensation for mini-grid projects when a distribution company comes within the locality. So when you have a mini-grid in an area where there is no electricity network before, and then a disco eventually comes within the area, the disco is expected to compensate you at a value provided by the Act before you are taken off, or they interconnect with you and collaborate with you to provide electricity within that area. So this is just to, to catalyze the prospect of having investment within that, within the mini-grid space. So that's to speak to, a lot of things to speak to, but yeah, I'll just speak to that when it comes to regulations. There are a couple of others, many regulations governing different areas. Right, so when it comes to regulatory agencies, it's important to know that there are several agencies within the electricity sector that govern different aspects of the value chain. Okay, we're speaking of the value chain. I think Engineer Bruno mentioned that. So you have your generation companies, then you move to transmission, then you move to distribution, and then you move to the consumer. So that's the value chain. But a lot of things happen within that line, right? And again, I just forgot to mention that, transmission all the while in Nigeria has been regulated at the federal level. So one of the very interesting innovations of the Electricity Act is that transmission is now liberalized. So people can actually apply for transmission licenses, right, to construct or upgrade transmission lines at within different parts of the country. State governments as well can also have their transmission lines. So yeah, I was coming back to regulatory agencies. We have the main regulator for the power sector is the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. And that's the apex regulatory body. And essentially their role is to, regulate the market from issuing licenses and approvals to monitoring compliance by players within the sector. Regulators are more like people that balance the interest of all stakeholders. So sometimes I really feel their plight. Like I have a friend that works with NEC, and I could feel his concern when he says, I have to balance the interest of a lot of people. So discos come and tell you, oh, we are not getting enough tariff, we can't do our business, we're running at a loss. And then you have consumers crying on one underarm saying, oh, the tariff is too high, we can't pay. And then you have gas suppliers at one hand saying, well, we are not being paid. There's so many interests to balance. So it's really a Herculean task really for regulators to be able to balance different interests. And that is why they play a very major role in ensuring that every aspect of every part of the value chain is well catered for. No one is operating at disadvantage of the other. And that's why they require certain things to be done with approvals, with consent, with necessary notifications. Okay, so we have the Federal Ministry of Power, which is, of course, the overall policy body when it comes to electricity sector. Then we have, very importantly, the Rural Electrification Agency. This is one agency that has been playing a very phenomenal role within the energy sector. So I think recently under the Electricity Act, they now have the obligation to promote renewable energy within the country. So they are responsible for ensuring that, people in the rural areas have access to electricity. People in underserved areas or unserved areas have access to electricity. And recently they've been doing a lot with respect to renewable energy, particularly in partnership with the World Bank. Right. Shalom, let me know how much time I have, please.
Yes, you have
And
10 minutes.
perhaps 10 minutes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So other agencies include Nigeria National Electricity Management Service Agency, and now this is the agency that is responsible for promoting technical electrical standards and regulation within the market or within the sector. And this is very important because we see, because the electricity sector, you have a lot of machineries, equipment going in and out or manufactured in country. I think the purpose of NEMSA is to ensure that we don't have counterfeit products, and whatever product is used for any project meets the right standard and does not cause harm to the environment as well as the consumers or people generally. There are other related agencies that work within the NEC. We have the Ministry of Environment. For any electricity project, you need to have an environmental impact assessment. So this ministry is very handy when it comes to that. Then you also then have the BPE. Well, to some extent, and the reason why I mentioned BPE here is because they regulate most of the federal government project when it comes to NDPHC. We know about NDPHC, and they kind of manage the entire assets of the federal government within the power sector. Yeah, particularly when it comes to liaising with the private sector in that regard. Okay, so what aspect of the power sector is regulated? So it's important to know that it's not every aspect of the power sector that is regulated, right? So for instance, if you are generating electricity below 1 megawatt for your use, so like I have a company now and I just want to get a power plant of maybe say 900 kV or 900 kilowatts, then I don't need to go to NEC, right? And I'm using it just for myself. I'm not selling to anyone. So it means if I need to generate electricity less than 1 megawatt and I'm just using it for myself, my house, or in an organization, and I'm not selling to a third party, I do not need to approach the regulator for any license. But anything above 1 megawatt, but if it's above 1 megawatt, but it's still for self-use, then you don't need to apply for a license. What you apply for is a permit, which is a lot more easier and less expensive to acquire. But anything above 1 megawatt and you're looking to sell to anyone, then you must get a license. And this is applicable whether it is a thermal project or it is a renewable energy project, right? And then when it comes to distribution, if you're distributing anything above 100 kilowatt, you need a distribution license, okay? And of course, there are other requirements around that when it comes to distribution licenses. But yes, the threshold for getting license is 100 kilowatts. For trading, if you need to trade electricity, you need to get a license for that. So those are like the areas that are regulated within the sector. And like I said, this is applicable whether it's renewable energy or thermal energy. And just to also mention that, policies, like I say, laws, regulation are very fundamental. And I would, like I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of incentives that I've, in my course of my research, I've seen other countries that, they've implemented to boost the power sector, to boost the renewable energy sector. And well, I can't say, Nigeria and many emerging markets have a lot of challenges within the sector. But then I would say that there are various means to improve investment, to attract investors, and also to promote renewable energy, in and around the country. And I'll take, for instance, I think a particular state in the United States, they provide tax incentives or tax credits, to those who use renewable energy, meaning that if I buy renewable energy today, I'm allowed to net off the cost over a period of 5 years from my taxes. So with that, a lot of people are incentivized to go get renewable energy. But currently in Nigeria, just speaking specifically now to renewable energy, there are incentives. Well, though not very not a lot of it, but yeah, I'll just mention a few just to give some insight. So for instance, VAT, renewable energy equipment, are exempted from VAT. VAT meaning value added tax. So you don't need to pay value-added tax if you are buying a renewable energy equipment. Right. Then the second one is called Pioneer Industry Tax Exemption. So the way it works is if you're within the renewable energy space, you can apply to the relevant ministry. I think is I'm trying to remember the name of the ministry now. I will recall that later, but they can apply to relevant ministry, and what it entitles you to is a 3 years exemption from tax. So you won't pay capital, you won't pay your company's income tax for 3 years. That's the way of, incentivizing you to, invest within the sector. And then there's also, now this is more like some waiver, some import duty waiver. Yeah, I think that's something like that for renewable energy products coming into the country. But I believe we can do more. I believe taking a cue from other countries, like I talked about the US Inflation Act, that provided for, huge chunks of tax credits and incentives for, for switching your existing appliances with an energy efficient appliances, for transitioning to renewable energy. There are lots and lots of incentives all over the world. And it's expected perhaps that as the market grows, particularly in Nigeria and Africa, we get to see more of those incentives to get people to get on board renewable energy. So I'll just stop here. I guess my time is up so that we can take questions or comments from anyone. Thank you very much again for having me.
Wow, this is so amazing. Thank you so much for the section, Martine. And I'll go right into the questions so that we don't take so much of our time. The first question is from Mr. Excel, and he's asking, is electricity seen as a human right under the policy framing? I'll give this to you, and then Mr. Engineer Bruno can also share insights to us on the question.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to turn on my video. I don't know why it's okay. Yeah. The question is if electricity is a human right. My brother. Electricity is not a human right. Well, okay, so I hear you, but electricity, or rather access to electricity, I guess that's the question, is not a human right. So in the Constitution, we have two kinds of rights. You have human rights. Those human rights are the rights that are enforceable, in that if the government fails to grant that to you, you can sue them. Like, this is my right, and you must ensure that I have it. Then there's this other part of the rights. I think that's in part 2. Sorry, it's been a while I read my Constitution, but yeah, I think it's in part 2 of the Constitution that speaks to certain other rights, that deals with, economic development, right to go to school and all of those things. They are not human rights. They are things that the government is expected to do as against the right. So as much as they're in the Constitution, you can't really enforce them, although some aspect of them from, Africa, there's this Africa, body of rights that's in, I think Africa Regulation on Human Rights. But I'm not certain that access to electricity is one of them. And let me explain why. A lot of people complain electricity should be free and, electricity should be cheap. And I think it's important. And I like to say this every time I have an opportunity to. Electricity is an expensive commodity. It's expensive to, and I like, the tariff paid in Nigeria for electricity is one of the cheapest around the world. And that is why in many developed countries, electricity is expensive, really, really expensive. You see them turning off their lights when it's not in use because they're trying to save cost. So, and it's important that Nigerians begin to understand. Now, I get the fact that, we don't have good electricity, right? But I feel like we need to begin to reorientate Nigerians and Africans to know that it takes money to produce good electricity, right? So, and which is why I would say there are different options when it comes to electricity. Okay, you have the grid electricity, you can go solar privately if you want. There are different options, but what's important to know is that because a lot of people, or to execute an electricity project costs millions and millions of naira, sometimes in dollars, billions, you can go on. And the businessman or the investor he's not into charity. He has to get back, he has to make commercial sense. So which is why, so if you want, and I'm not excluding, of course, the corruption issues we have in the country, yes, but just all things being equal, electricity is an expensive commodity, and to make it a human right might be extremely difficult because the government on its own might not be able to foot the bill of, subsidizing it for an entire country. It's not sustainable. Thank you very much. I hope that provides some insight. Thank you.
That was really spot on. And Engineer Bruno, do you have any comments on the question?
Yeah, I could add to what Cheyenne has said. I think it's a good question. And the answer is, in Brazil, we have a concept that has been put even in our constitutional framework, which is electricity and other services are public services in their original concept. But me as a regulator, and I think it is it's the best approach one could have for this kind of sector, is that we engage the private sector in order to provide the services. So it's a public service that is provided by the particular, by the private owners. And so this is the general aspect. But of course, we have, especially in the poorer countries, we have a great amount of the population that cannot afford the bills, cannot pay for the bills. And in Brazil, and this is where, so my first approach was a regulation, a technical approach. It's a public aim. It's a very fair, and it's a matter of justice that everyone has access to electricity. Yes, and it's not, as Cheyenne said, it's not for free. It's somehow it might be expensive, but this is a technical approach. But this. We can add to that the public policy design as well. In the end, it's something that awareness of the government in order to allocate with justice the costs. And I would say that in Brazil we have two public policies devoted to this kind of allocation and justice sickness, which is we have a huge public policy where the poor part of the population do not pay for the whole bill. We have subsidies put in place in order to make the final bill for this part of the population feasible. And I think this is fair. And so this very simply saying, the biggest part of the bill is divided for the other part of the population that can afford these costs. So me as a medium class or high level class in the population, I pay for my bill, and a part of my bill is also the subsidy that the poorer part of the population does not pay for the entire bill. And it has also to do in the, which is very related to the economic capacity, payment capacity in the regions that we don't have the grid, and there will always be a region where the population will not be entirely connected to the grid, to the national grid, because of economic reasons. And for that special population, this is a technical stuff as well. You must be aware of the word that I always forget, reliability. And sometimes in the Amazon region, for instance, you don't have plenty of sun and not wind as well. It rains a lot, and we don't have wind as well. So the only practical source is the oil, the classic oil, the polluant oil, and which is pollutant and also expensive. And this is another reason, but in the end, we have also subsidies for this kind of population. They pay only the amount of their bill in the end is the average value for the people which are connected to the national grid. So they pay for the average price of the tariffs in the national grid, and the part which is above this average, it is also subsidized and shared among all the rest of the population of Brazil. So this is an example on how we can address this kind of issue, because there is no free lunch.
This is justice enough, and I like to hear that. I hope that Nigeria can also adopt some of this.
No, I was just going to add, Shalom, on that point, we actually do have what we call power consumer. I think I've written a paper on that before. Power Consumer Assistance Fund. It's called PCAF, but unfortunately, it's not yet operationalized in Nigeria. It's in the law, but not yet operational. But currently, the government is, is undertaking subsidies for most electricity tariff. Again, but that's not sustainable. And that is why the recent amendment was to take out some people from that subsidy. So for those on band A, customers on band A, because what we have in Nigeria is different categories of consumers, right? So we have band A, band B, bands down to those who can't really afford the electricity. They pay the least cost of electricity. So it's on a reducing tariff level. But then again, like I think, if you ask my view on that point, I think it makes sense, because you can't have those who are the higher end consumers, the rich, enjoying subsidies. I think it should be for the lower end. But then again, the only aspect of it I'm hoping that they keep to is aspect of the 20 hours electricity that has been promised. All right, so thank you.
Yeah. I know we would like to let Ms. Chinaya go. So the thing is, I would read all the questions and you can just answer them maybe like 1 or 2 minutes. So I'll just read all the questions. The first one was just section of the Electricity Act that borders on RE aspects. I know you mentioned part of it, but I think you wanted to know the specific section, if you can still fetch that information. And the next was, how will the licensing process work for states, companies, and individuals who want to generate, transmit, and distribute electricity? And the last one, which is just talking about electricity reliability, what kind of policies and structures will be there, or are they planning to put in place to strengthen our weak grid? I'm sure this is for Nigeria.
Yeah. Okay, so the first one, I think the section should be around section 164 of the Electricity Act. So maybe you can check. Well, something is that 164. I know 164 is one of them, but around that, you should be able to find provisions of renewable energy, right? And on the second one, it being the licensing process. Now there are different regulations that speak to licensing. So there's a regulation for on how to apply for generation license. Usually apply to NERC, tell them on the kind of plant you want to apply for. That if you check the NERC websites, www.nerc.ng, so just search for Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, and then check on the website, you find the requirement for licenses. So yeah, so we have licenses, generation license. You can apply for a trading license, and then you can also apply for distribution license, right? And for transmission, like I said, currently the law allows for private sector to invest in transmission, either at the state level. Now, if you notice, before now, many states do not have electricity markets or any electricity law regulation. But with the new Electricity Act, a lot of states are drafting. I think Lagos State has one already. A couple of other states, Enugu State has one. I hear Kaduna State is working on theirs. So a lot of states are coming up with different laws. So it means that if you want to carry out any electricity project in those states, then you would then need to approach those states and apply for relevant license, look at their laws, which is why you would always necessarily need a lawyer, right, to guide you with respect. And that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. So I help people help them understand what aspect of your business that require licensing and regulation and everything around that. The last one is the policy on what? Let me see.
Yes, the how to strengthen our weak grid, electricity reliability.
Okay. So electricity reliability. Now that's a big one. A lot of things go into the electricity grid. But again, I believe that some of the provisions of the Electricity Act is meant to address this. Before it was solely within the ambit of the federal government, but now private sector can come in. And this means that the more private sector participate in that space, you should expect to see some improvement within the grid and that. So of course you then have at the state level as well. So I would say the policies are all intertwined, but it's one thing to have policies, one thing to have laws, another thing to implement them. So we are hopeful that the different state governments will do what is necessary to implement these laws to actually bring about real life results that every one of us can see. Yeah,
Thank you so
I
much.
think,
I think, yeah, that's it. I told the person to share their email address for the updated version. I'll reach out to you and we'll share it across to everybody. But before Mr. Engineer Bruno will shed light on it, please can we turn on our camera, just a quick photo with our guests? Just a quick one, then Engineer Bruno rounds out the section for us. If you're close by to your video, we just want to take a picture. And thank you so much. Okay. I think I can take the picture right away. All right. 1, 2, 3, go. Thank you so much, Mr. Tineye, and I'll keep you updated if there are any other requirements from our side. Thank you so much.
all right,
Okay.
thank you very much. Thank you, Engineer Bruno, and thank you everyone for joining in. Catch you later. Bye.
All right.
Thank
Bye.
you all. It's a
Okay.
pleasure. Bye bye.
All
See
right.
you.
Bye.
Okay. Thank you, Engineer Bruno. Oh, I was supposed to share a survey and everybody had them. Oh, we would have to share the survey. Oh, our normal platform. I guess everybody,